If you were a casual boxing fan and the only person you really follow was Floyd Mayweather Jr., and you didn't really know much else about the sport, about the other fighters, and let's say, because now that Floyd's retired, you still follow Floyd. So all you're really getting recently in your boxing news is what Floyd's been saying in his interviews and all these other appearances he's made post-retirement. You would swear, you know, by the ear of Floyd, well, by the mouth of Floyd, that Andre Ward is the most victimized, can't get a break boxer in the sport right now. You would honestly believe that. You would think that everybody, from fans, promoters, judges, are all out to get Andre Ward, out to see him lose. Floyd's been talking about Ward a lot recently. I'm looking at an article here from BoxingScene.com that posted a few days ago. And it starts out saying, Floyd Mayweather Jr. considers Andre Ward the best boxer pound for pound in the world now that he is retired. Then it gets into some of Floyd's comments on Andre Ward. Here they are, and I quote, "You gotta really look at things like this. When Bernard Hopkins was a middleweight trying to fight Oscar De La Hoya, Shane Mosley, and Felix Trinidad, they, the media, said he was calling out smaller guys. When this guy Triple G does it, they don't say shit. Once again, I'm not racist." Let's see how he even got into that. "I'm just saying racism still exists. Do I think that they're trying to get Andre Ward beat? Absolutely. Andre Ward, if you're reading this article, if I was you, I wouldn't move up to 175 pounds to fight the guy Kovalev." Talking about Sergey Kovalev. If that's his name, because I really don't know his name. I know he's a light heavyweight. Floyd continues. "Andre Ward is a 68-pounder, 168-pounder, and I think he should continue to dominate at 168. This is what I think should happen." Now, before I even get into the BS with Andre Ward, like being the victim here, Andre Ward is no longer a 168-pounder. Andre Ward was a 168-pounder. He was a damn good one, too. Won the Super Six and all that. But Andre Ward's last fight was against Paul Smith, who is a 168-pounder, at a catch weight of, I believe, 173 pounds. His next fight is rumored to be at another catch weight, the same one, like 173, 172, somewhere around there. So the man clearly ain't trying to fight at 168 anymore. That's behind him. So he's not a 168-pounder. Let's just get that out the way now. He's a 168-pounder the way Canelo Alvarez is still a junior middleweight. Which is to say he's not, because his last few fights at junior middleweight have also been at catch weights of like 155, I believe. Against Lara and even Angulo, he was at 155. So Andre Ward is not a 168-pounder anymore. That's the first thing. Second thing, we start out, Floyd Mayweather Jr. considers Andre Ward the best boxer pound for pound. The title of the article is, "Ward shouldn't fight Kovalev, GGG, easy work." Well, if Gennady Golovkin's easy work, why should the number 2 pound for pound fighter fight him, who's a smaller guy? Why wouldn't he go up and fight a tougher challenge in Kovalev? A challenge who you think, Floyd, is going to beat him, apparently, because that's why they want this fight to happen, for Andre Ward to get beat. I mean, I don't get it. If he's really pound for pound one for, number 2, then what's your fear of him fighting Kovalev? Particularly when it's just a weight division above him, and right now, that's the weight division he's fighting in. Not officially, with the catch weights, but that's the division he's fighting in. He couldn't fight at 173 for 168. He can fight at 175 at 173. So I don't understand Floyd's beef here. And as far as the racism goes, where's that coming from? I don't understand that. How is racism coming to play that apparently some unknown forces want Andre Ward beat, so they're throwing him to Kovalev? As if he has no shot against Kovalev. That doesn't make any sense to me. Now, if he said HBO wants Andre Ward beat because Kovalev's an HBO fighter, then I would agree with that. I definitely agree with HBO would like to see their fighter, their guaranteed fighter, Kovalev, beat Andre Ward to make him look better. But, you know, if I'm not mistaken, Andre Ward's fought, what, 5 times in the last 5 years? Right? 2 times in 2011, once in 2012, once in 2013, didn't fight at all in 2014, came back and fought once in 2015. Now we're in 2016, I think he's supposed to get 2 fights or whatever. So he's fought 5 times in the last 5 years. 2 of those fights were on HBO. You had the Chad Dawson fight after the Super 6, right? After the Super 6, in which HBO snagged Andre Ward up immediately. They snagged him up immediately. He was on Showtime for the Super 6. They snagged him up. They put him on HBO with the Chad Dawson fight. They had him commentating seemingly every HBO After Dark. I thought he had officially taken the place of Roy Jones Jr. They had him on there so much. They constantly talked about both Kellerman, who still does, and even Jim Lampley, back then anyway, constantly saying he's pound for pound number 2, which I didn't disagree with. I still don't disagree with. Constantly. Seemingly every broadcast, somehow they weave in that Andre Ward is pound for pound number 2, with him there right next to them. This was happening on HBO for a good 2 years, right? He has that fight, then he has the Edwin Rodriguez fight. Both those fights he did over 1 million views. I know for a fact Edwin Rodriguez, he did like 1.3 million views. For Chad Dawson, he did, if he didn't do 1 million, he did 900-something thousand. His viewership when he went to HBO was much higher than it had been. Again, because they had him on every HBO broadcast, they're pumping him up, right, marketing him as the next great thing, right, the next pound-for-pound king, which he is. And what happens? He's not fighting. 2 fights in all that time. Because he had issues with his promoter. He wanted to get out of his promoter. Hey, and that's fine. You want to get out of your promoter, that's fine. But you're not fighting. So, and really, since you're the one battling with your promoter and choosing not to fight, who does that fall on? Like, is his promoter victimizing him, holding him back? No. He was the one who wanted the break. So he holds himself back from fighting. He gets out of his promoter. He gets signed by Rock Nation. This victimized fighter that, you know, oh my God, poor Andre Ward, he gets signed by Rock Nation. And then they have so much confidence in him that they put him on BET, an unproven boxing platform. And he flops. I think they said like something, it was reported around like 300-something views, which is awful. Complete flop. And people are like, oh my God, Andre Ward, this, and that. Like, poor Andre Ward. Well, hold on. He was doing 1 million views on HBO. He did 1 million views with Edwin Rodriguez. Who knows Edwin Rodriguez? What casual fans know Edwin Rodriguez? He did over 1 million views. But he didn't stay there. He elected to sign with Rock Nation, understanding that they wouldn't guarantee him a spot always on HBO. He allowed them to put him on BET. He didn't protest it. Even though he had a nice bed, comfy bed in HBO. They put him over at BET, and he flops badly. And now HBO doesn't mind that he's coming back to fight one of their guys, Kovalev, whom, if Kovalev beats him, that's great, because they already put so much stock and hype on Andre Ward. Now Kovalev immediately shoots up to pound for pound number 1, right? Because he just beat pound for pound number 2. And Kovalev is guaranteed HBO. If Andre Ward wins, maybe HBO and Rock Nation work something out that he fights consistently now on HBO. Nowhere else. So you still have possibilities there, even if your guy doesn't win, if you're HBO. So how is Andre Ward victimized? Who's really out to get him? I would love Floyd to answer that question. Who's out to get him? If you want to tell me HBO, okay, fine, but they could still win there. The boxing media, I haven't seen too many boxing media that are like anti-Andre Ward. Steve Kim's the only one who immediately comes to mind. Steve Kim, journalist for UNC Live, doesn't like Andre Ward. I know that much. But I haven't seen too many or read too many articles where people are clearly anti-Andre Ward. A lot of fans don't like him. A lot of fans are tired of him always talking and not fighting. I don't blame him for that. Floyd also made some other comments. Let's see, he made some recently about Ward. He says, I can't believe they, being Ring Magazine, got Andre Ward ranked number 4 on the pound-for-pound list. Even though the guy that's ranked number 1, Roman Gonzalez, you can't argue about that. But without Andre Ward losing a fight, he has to be number 2. I mean, he wins his fights not in good fashion, but in great fashion. And they have him at number 4. They got some guy ranked number 9. I don't really know his full name, so I don't want to be disrespectful. But they got a Japanese guy ranked number 9. They got Andre Ward number 4. And this guy that's ranked number 9, we don't even know who he is. I truly believe that racism still exists in the sport of boxing. Well, I'm sure racism does exist in the sport of boxing. But you're backing that up by saying that they have a Japanese guy ranked number 9. A Latino guy ranked number 1. A Latino guy who goes by Chocolatito because he's dark-skinned at number 1. And Andre Ward at number 4. And with that information, you're using that to support your argument that racism still exists in boxing. It's not the strongest argument. That's just me. That's not the strongest argument. I mean, look, people, I've seen different videos here on YouTube, people agreeing with Floyd, completely like, oh yeah, racism still exists in boxing. Again, I'm sure it does. Of course it does. Of course you have racist people in boxing. You certainly do with the fans on Twitter and YouTube. That's one thing I'm surprised a lot of these YouTubers are commenting on, like, you know, that they agree with Floyd. I guess that there's people behind the scenes, promoters and whatnot, who are racist, and I'm sure there are. I don't know how many, I'm sure there are. Don't think that applies to Ward. I don't think racism is holding him back at all. But, I mean, you see some of these Twitter dudes commenting, you see some of these comments on YouTube, that's where your racism in boxing really is. Some of these fans. But, I don't even know, man. Floyd, you know, you cry racism in instances where it may not even be the case. And over stupid things, like things where it might not even... Andre Ward being ranked lower than Gennady Golovkin, I think the issue here is that Gennady Golovkin on the Ring Magazine is ranked number 3. That doesn't mean racism. That could just be favoritism. How about bias? The people like Golovkin more because he's more exciting. He's been fighting much more recently. Ward's not a very exciting fighter. So they discredit him, putting him at number 4. Racism isn't the only possible reason why they would rank a white dude in Golovkin over Ward. Could easily just as well be favoritism. Like, Floyd jumps to racism, then a whole bunch of people, Floyd fans, I guess, who, you know, that kind of that idol worship thing where somebody you admire says something, so you immediately stick to it. You assume that they're right. And yeah, you know, it's racism. Not necessarily. Could just be bias. Could just be favoritism. A lot of people like Golovkin. He's a knockout artist. Andre Ward is not a knockout artist. Andre Ward will clinch a lot. He doesn't always make the prettiest fights. And again, you don't support your argument of racism when you point out that the number 1 guy is Latino, a dark-skinned Latino nicknamed Chocolatito, and a Japanese guy at number 9 who you never heard of. I don't see where the racism is there. And then Ward at number 4. Anyway, that's my take on Floyd and this Andre Ward victimization bullcrap. Andre Ward victimized himself. He had a beautiful viewership at HBO. And he chose to throw it away. He rarely fought. He signed with Rock Nation, allowed them to put him on BT. Now he's not HBO's golden child anymore. They'll still take him back if they can, but if they can beat him, no love lost. Because he was their golden child, but he chose not to be. That ain't everybody else alienating him and victimizing him. He did that to himself. That's what it is.